Okay, I'm going live, honey. Hello, everybody. This is Joe Firestone for Empowering Democracy. And our topic for tonight is how can we make it happen? My guest for tonight is the activist on the Gregory Mallard. And he's not only an activist, he is also a farm worker. And he just got through lifting too many sacks of wheat. Okay, and is recovering from a little painful incident. But he put that aside to appear here tonight. And I'm grateful to him for coming. So how you doing at this minute, Greg?
Oh, I'm doing fine this evening. It just finished raining down here in South Georgia. We just got another half-inch of rain.
So South Georgia gets a lot of rain?
Especially this time of year because we got a cold front that's approaching, according to what the local weather reports said this evening.
Does rain give you a lot of problems when you're out there? I'll bet it does.
Well, it'll knock you off for about a day or two. Then you have to wait for it to dry up. Then you can get back at it.
Okay, so here's where we are. We've done quite a bit of talking now. And we've kind of decided on two objectives, or goals. They're actually goals to try to make things happen. First, there's the objective of dumping the corruption by getting money out of politics. Hey, Steve Wolfbrandt, how are you? Hi, Kay Ryan. Nice to see you both. So, we now come to the how. How are we going to do this? And I'm going to start off by saying that I've been trying to dump the corruption going for more than a year now. I started by using the hashtag, and credit due to Lana Dell for suggesting this one, hashtag dump the incumbents, and by doing a presentation on why dumping the incumbents was so important. Over a period of time, it became clear that it wasn't just a matter of getting the money out for the incumbents. It was also a matter of getting the money out for the challengers as well. So that's why we changed the name from Dump the Incumbents to Dump the Corruption, so as to take account of big money that was going to the challengers also. We have to get the big money out of politics by getting the people who take the big money out of politics and getting a whole new Congress and whole new state legislatures and whole new local governments whose legislatures are only made up of people who were elected through small donations and who have no contact at all with the big donors. This, of course, would disempower the big donors and would also get money out of politics by refusing to vote for people who are giving the big money to candidates. And now, to be clear, this is not it's not simply a matter of people who give money to candidates. It's a matter of corporations who give substantial amounts of money to candidates. It's a matter of PACs that give a substantial amount of money. Of course, also super PACs that don't directly give to campaigns, but make a bunch of independent expenditures in support of particular candidates, supposedly with no coordination with the campaigns. But we know very well there are various ways in which the super PACs do coordinate with the campaigns. And then finally, there are also party committees. The party committees of major parties get a lot of money from the super PACs, from the PACs, from the rich corporations, and from the rich people. And basically, the party committees launder the money. So candidates can say, well, we didn't take any money from PACs. We didn't get any money from super PAC. We didn't get any money from corporations. And we didn't get any money from rich people. All our money came from the party committees. We have a right to take money from the party committees, don't we? After all, we're members of the party. Well, what's happening is the party committees are laundering the money from these other sources. Everybody knows who these other sources are. Everybody knows they're going to stop giving the money. Those donors will stop giving the money if the Congress people don't vote in the way the donors want them to vote. So yeah, we gotta have to sabotage the link from the party committees to the donors also. And the only way to do that is to use a litmus test and to say, if any of that money is in support of any of the candidates, our rule has to be we vote against those candidates. If they're incumbents, we vote against them. If they're challengers, we vote against them. So clearly, this is going to work because if we would to make it happen successfully, wouldn't have any donor money in politics then, because all those who take it would be gone and would continue to be gone. So we, the people, have the inherent power, if we choose to use it, to get the big money out, okay, of politics. What our problem is that the relatively simple words that I've been expressing over the last 5 minutes or so have to be spread to everybody, all the voters. All the voters have to come to understand it, and all the voters have to act. They have to act accordingly, in line with the central rule that you don't vote for, but instead you vote against anybody who is taking or getting the support of the big money. Okay? politics. The question is, how do we make a campaign like that actually happen? I've been trying for a year now to get the campaign, that kind of campaign, seated by using these live streams. The idea has been spreading somewhat. Had some good guests on the show. We've had a number of Dump the Corruption shows. There are more people talking about the idea, but judging from a number of people who come to our live streams, we've obviously not gotten very far, or we would have many more people coming to these live streams. Now, in the last election, the one that just ended, we noticed that some of the candidates were starting to complain that their donors were beneficiaries of the big money and were corrupt as a result. I think that got into Summer Lee's campaign somewhat. Okay, I think it got into Jamie Skinner's campaign out in Oregon somewhat. But okay, I don't think this complaint, and certainly the use of the rule, the use of the litmus test, I don't think that was a feature of the campaign of anyone who ran for office. I think that's a big mistake the candidates who are not taking big money are making. They should be going against the people who are taking or getting the money and making the litmus test a central part of their campaign, challenging voters and asking them, why are you considering voting for X or for Y, okay, or for Z? You can see them taking all this big money, getting all this big money from the donors. Who do you think they're going to represent? You? Or are they going to be representing the donors? This should be the topmost issue in every political campaign at every level. The issue of representation. Now, I think I'm not the only one who thinks that. Even though he hasn't talked about a litmus test, there was an interview Chris Hedges had with Ralph Nader. I think the interview is less than 2 weeks old. It may be newer than that. Okay. And Ralph Nader drew the connection between people taking donor money and people who were not representing their constituents, but representing their donors instead. That was one of the answers to the questions that were posed by Chris Hedges. And yet, that wasn't a part of the political campaigns of the progressives who were struggling to get into office, but who were outgunned by the money. There were two really good progressive candidates in North Carolina who were running for House seats, who were beaten by the money. They were beaten by the DMFI PAC, and they were also beaten by the Super PAC. that was founded by the AIPAC as well. And they were beaten by Sam Bankman Fried's super PAC that was handing out money like it was water all over the country to people who were not progressives, undermining the primaries in the Democratic Party with this money. And then, of course, it was the two campaigns where Nina Turner lost to Chantel Brown. And even though many aspects of Nina's campaign were very good, she didn't try going after Chantel Brown by talking up the support of the super PAC she was getting and by talking up the idea that there was no way Chantel Brown was going to represent that district because she was too bought by the donors. There was no way she would be a real progressive. And so it has been. We've seen that since Chantel Brown came into the Congress. She's a caver. She's a folder. She does everything the establishment wants her to do. And she doesn't do anything for the people of her district. I don't think Nina Turner ran her campaign saying this in so many words. I think that's why she lost. That's why a number of other people have been defeated all over the country, even though they were good candidates. I didn't even see this from Jessica Cisneros, in Texas, who was running against Henry Cuellar. She ran a good race again. She talked about the interests and their relationship to Henry Cuellar, but she did not directly advocate for a litmus test and tell people, Henry Cuellar is disqualified. He fails this litmus test. He's not going to do things for you. He's only going to do things for the donors. Anyway, what I'm saying is, I think progressive campaigns in 2024 should make that kind of reasoning front and center. Should accuse their opposition of being bought. Should make the simple point. Ask people the simple question. Who do you think your opponent's going to represent? Will they represent you or will they represent the donors? Don't you want your congressperson or senator to represent you, or do you want them to represent those donors? I mean, that's the critical question. People running for office need to pose that question to their would-be constituents. Have to keep on asking that question and ground their campaigns in that question, because that's the number one question above all others. Will the person running for office represent their constituents, or will they represent their donors? How can we socialize that to everybody, Greg? That's my current problem.
That should be all of our current problems, and we need to, when we are discussing with candidates that are running for office, we need to also press that question. Are you going to hold them accountable? Are you going to rake them over the coals in their corruption and call them out or are you going to just let it slide and not let them go unchecked? Because if you don't hold their primary challengers to account for just who they are going to represent, or if they are going to represent you, if you do not hold them accountable and rake them over the coals, then they're just going to get away with it. They're only going to get worse. And each time they are not held accountable, then they're only going to get away with it. And that's what we have seen historically, is just by not calling out the big money. Like here in Georgia's 12th Congressional District, for example, when I worked on a congressional race here in 2018 as a volunteer, and I pressed this question: are you willing to call your primary opponent out on just who they're going to represent, or are you not going to do it at all and not holding them to account?
So who was the candidate in that race, and who was
That
the
was
primary?
Trent Neesmith back in 2018.
Okay, and who was the opponent?
Francis Johnson, civil rights attorney from Statesboro, Georgia.
And the civil rights attorney was also a Democrat.
Yes, it was in the Democrat primary back in 2018. And what there was a spoiler that jumped into the race last minute to kneecap the progressive Trent Neesmith out of the race. The guy did not even have a platform. He didn't have a campaign website. He didn't even bother campaigning, but yet he came in second place without even doing anything.
How did he come in second place without doing anything?
I have no on earth idea how he come in second place to kneecap a progressive.
But wasn't he spending a lot of money?
Yeah, he was spending a lot of big donor money.
So why was it that that Neesmith didn't call him out?
And I pressed him on that too. And I said, why didn't you call him out on the use of big money to kneecap you? And I called him and I asked him there the day after he lost the primary. I said, you should have held them to account. And that's when I started thinking, just like you, why are we as progressives not call the real progressives? Why are we not calling even our primary opponents out on their corruption and how they are taking big donor money and intentionally losing a race to a Republican?
Yeah, in Michigan, Mike Levin, who had been in Congress for some time now, okay, and who was a believer in Palestinian rights. But in terms of the religious aspect, he was a pillar of his community. He had been the president of his temple. He was pro-Israel in terms of continuing to support the existence, okay, of Israel. But he believed in defending Palestinian rights. And so the DMFI came into his campaign and they saw to it that he would lose, in spite of the fact that he'd been a great congressman for his district. He still got beat by another Democrat who was not nearly his equal. He didn't run his campaign based on the question, who is my opponent going to represent? Are they going to represent you, or are they going to represent these big donors who are pouring millions into this campaign to defeat me? Who do you think they're going to represent? Now, this might not have been entirely effective in that case because the district was heavily pro-Israeli. And so it might have been the case that the voters in that district might have thought, well, this other candidate is going to represent me better. But that might not have been the case. I'm just saying that was the issue in that campaign. It was a dominant issue for many people. And many people associate the idea of respecting the human rights of Palestinians with being somehow anti-Semitic. Now, on its face, it was ridiculous to call Mike Levin, an anti-Semite. I mean, his whole life was against that. But still, the anti-Semite attack backed by the big money was effective in that particular situation. I still think he should have called out the question, who do you think is going to represent you when it comes to Social Security? Who do you think is going to represent you when it comes to student debt elimination? Who do you think is going to represent you when it comes to Medicare for all? Will she, my opponent, represent you? Or will I represent you? Is she, who is taking all this money from this PAC and super PAC that is primarily supported by big donors, is she going to represent you, or am I going to represent you? I mean, that question should be the question that all these progressive candidates should be using to defend themselves. And not just to defend themselves, but to go on the offense against their challenges.
Yeah, just like in football, they need to have a strategy to win an election and go on the offense and defend their position and call their opponents out. And just like Jessica Cisneros, she should have done that. Maybe she would have won that primary. But what didn't help the matter was Henry Cuellar was extremely anti-choice Democrat, just like Joe Manchin. She should have used that against him.
She should have used that against him. I don't have any objection to using that against him, too. Okay, but Henry Cuellar isn't a Democrat as far as his behavior is concerned. So if they wanted a Democrat to win because they thought a real Democrat, was going to represent them, then no way they should have gone for Cuellar. Even if Clyburn did come down there and campaign for Cuellar, even if Nancy Pelosi did come down there as she did and campaign for Cuellar.
Like George Carlin always said, it's a big club and you ain't in it.
And we got to keep on making that point. And the progressive candidates have to keep on making that point. Who's going to represent you? Got to ask that question again and again and again.
And we've got to see to it that progressives running not only on the federal level, but also on your local level of governments, along with your state legislatures, we've got to see to it that they hold their primary challengers, and even their challengers that are on the opposite side are held to the same level of account. It's, they've got to call everyone out, saying, who are you going to represent? Who are you wanting to represent you? Somebody that's going to throw you under the bus on behalf of corporations, or somebody like me who is going to work for you and not against you, kind of scenario. Say that
Yeah.
to the voter. Do you want somebody that's going to work for you, or is going to throw you under the bus like you have had done in the past? Are you sick and tired of these big money interests controlling your politicians, or do you want somebody that will actually come and talk with you and hold public functions with you and actually work for you?
So Greg, you're about to start doing streams, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Streams of your own.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you going to use those streams to support the Dump the Corruption campaign?
Of course I am. And I'm also going to interview candidates who are going to run for office, and I'm going to press the issue to them. Are you willing to call out your primary opponents on this? And are you willing to let it slide and not let it go unchecked? Because if you let it go unchecked, then we don't want you.
But so what happens if they tell you people don't care about that? I say things like that to them. They say they don't care about that. What they want to do is talk about other issues. Okay. So what do you say in return?
I'd tell them, I'd say, before you can have any of this, you've got to remove the big money out of politics first. You can't just go in there on your first day and pass Medicare for all, full 100% student debt elimination, medical debt elimination, the Green New Deal. You can't do all that without removing the money from politics. You've got to remove all forms of corporate money from politics before you pass Medicare for all, total medical debt elimination, total student loan debt elimination, the Green New Deal, a federal job guarantee. The first things first, you've got to dump the corruption in order for anything else to pass. That's how you will get anything done, is by removing the corporate money from the political structure and make it illegal, and possibly include in the bill that if you are caught accepting money from the big moneyed interests, then you could potentially face jail time and removal from office as well.
Well, right now, that kind of threat is far fetched because they do take the big money. It's going on all the time. And mostly it's been legalized. As long as they follow the campaign rules, they're safe from
And
prosecution.
and the way Citizens United was passed to treat corporations as if they were people, that made it even worse. We've got to run a campaign on overturning Citizens United and
But
making it.
the only way to overturn CU is to pack the Supreme Court and impeach the judges who are responsible for CU and for all the friendly decisions since that point. You see, the key to all this is the Congress, is changing the Congress. Because the Congress has the power to limit the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. so they're not able to review certain cases involving certain issues.
Mm-hmm.
And the Congress has the power to impeach and convict the justices of the Supreme Court. But we've got to have the members of Congress who will do that, and members of Congress who are taking donor money will not do that. So it still goes back to the donor money. It's not a separate issue. Okay, but there was something else I wanted to say also based on.
Oh, and here's a question from CC Swift, which is a really great question about if I know about open secrets in Ballotpedia. Of course, I know about them, and that could also be used as a useful tool in getting to the root cause of which donors are donating to which candidates and use
We
that
have
against.
been doing that as a useful tool. Over the
Yeah.
last year, I've been working a lot, okay, with Ezra Wilson, who studies the financial aspects quite a lot and deals, he's primarily interested in getting progressives elected, okay, to Congress.
Mm-hmm.
He studies all the progressive candidates, their backgrounds, and keeps tabs on the financial aspects of what they're doing. Uh, and we've discussed this a lot. Okay, it's been on the program a lot. We've been devoting one day a week to it. I think one day a week is not enough.
No, it's not. As far from being enough. We're going to have to keep hammering this issue
We're going to have to keep.
until we get results that we want. We're going to have to keep hammering and keep harping on it until we get more people on board.
And one thing we've got to harp on, another thing we have to harp on is that this is a nonpartisan issue. This does not relate to whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or Libertarian or Green or anything. This is about whether your representation is going to be your representation or is going to be the donor's representation. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a Libertarian, okay, or a Green or whatever the hell your party, if you're a voter, you should still want your representative to be representing you and not representing the donors. That's a point we have to continuously make.
Like the great John F. Kennedy Jr. said in a quote, let us not seek the Democratic or Republican answer, but seek the American answer. And that's what we all need to do. We need to seek the common interest of who is going to represent us and who's going to represent the corporations of this country. Do you want to elect somebody that's beholden to the corporate elite, or do you want somebody that's just like you going up there and representing you, and that's willing to sit there and listen to you, the voter, instead of listening to their corporate interests? And that's something else that we need to be asking people. Are you willing to vote for another corporate clown that's going to go up against your best interests? Or are you going to vote for somebody that's more in line like you, that is an everyday average working class American that knows the pain and suffering of their neighbors, their friends, their families, their coworkers, all of their loved ones? Is that what you're going to want to vote for? Is somebody that's for the working class and for everybody else, and not the corporate interests?
Absolutely, that is absolutely so. But we also have to recognize that at some point, depending on how they behave, okay, a particular candidate, okay, of a particular party may be the only one offering an answer that represents her or his constituency. And we see that all the time. But we'll see it even more when the idea of dump the corruption takes hold. Then we will very generally have candidates who are bought by the money, who will not be legislating in the interests of the people, while some of the challengers who are fundraising only based on small donations will be representing the interests of the people, both in their campaigns and when they get into office. And this brings up another issue, which is a very important issue for us. It's a squad, of course.
Hang on just a second. I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, I'll wait for a second for Greg to come back because I want him to hear this. Okay, let me check out some comments while Greg is gone to make this next point. Yeah, CC, on an older show, I did mention the exceptions clause, Article 3, Section 2, okay, the Constitution. This is one of the things that's needed to rein in this particular SCOTUS. But we also need to pack the Supreme Court, and we need to impeach those justices as well to make all this stick. And we may eventually have to pass an amendment. A lot of people have been suggesting, okay, an amendment to end CU. But we have to remember that it takes 7 years to get the average amendment through. Doesn't take a year or even two. It's a major effort. All those states have to ratify it. And the legislatures in states, many states, are controlled by ALEC and by money being spent in those states. So having an amendment is basically saying we're still going to be run by money for the next 7 years or the next 8 years. That cannot be. It would be too late to do anything about the climate emergency then. Okay, so an amendment is not a practical solution now, in the short run. The only practical solution in the short run is for people to take this into their own hands and use the litmus test to throw the money out of politics by throwing the people who take it out of politics. Okay, so I have to emphasize that. But what I wanted to say to Greg was to talk about the squad.
Mm-hmm.
Point out that they were elected with small donor money. And I believe most of the money they take now is still small donor money. And they are raising huge quantities of money based on small donors, basically using the Bernie Sanders model. But that doesn't stop them from getting influenced by the donors. We have to note how that happens. When these new representatives come into Congress and come into Congress on the strength of their support from voters only and from small dollars, they get in there and they're facing a power structure. They don't have the ability to change that particular power structure in Congress. For the foreseeable future, the Democratic power structure in the House, for example, is going to be run by Hakeem Jeffries and Catherine Clark, okay, and Pete Aguilar. They were just elected to head up that institutional power structure. That power structure stands ready to punish any progressive who comes in and wants to fulfill the agenda that their voters want. Now, that power structure will get weaker and weaker as time goes on. But we could throw that power structure out in a single election if we used the litmus test. We could throw Hakeem Jeffries out in 2024. We could throw Catherine Clark out in 2024. We could throw Aguilar out in 2024. We could throw Richie Neal out in 2024.
Jim Clyburn,
if he runs again in 2024, he may not. He may feel his legacy is safe and that he's tired and he wants to go home to his wife. So,
and his district ain't too far from where I live in Georgia.
The point is that when our reps go in, they face this power structure. And to get any power in Congress themselves, which of course they desire, partly for the reason that they want to pass good legislation, they can't do that because the power structure won't allow them to do that. And they won't get any power if they do what they want to do. So they got to shut up. And they got to do things like vote for the establishment on the railroad strike issue and play games to try to hide what they're really doing. That, for example, all of them, except for Rashida Tlaib, were breaking a strike. If we look carefully, we know they were breaking a strike. None of them were elected to break strikes. They were elected to do the opposite. But the power structure has control on them. That's one reason why the incremental approach of electing more and more progressives as time goes on is going to be very, very slow in changing the situation because these people have to climb the ladder in Congress. What Dump the Corruption is about, in part, is getting rid of the ladder by getting rid of the people who are climbing the ladder right now, except for the people who are only taking small donations.
And you've also got to challenge that power structure as well, because if you don't challenge it, it will continue to go unchecked and get even worse over time.
You're right, but notice, if we use the litmus test and everybody votes that way, that power structure will be gone because the people who staffed it will be gone. Their seniority will be gone. There will only be new Congress members. They'll be able to change the rules the way they want to.
Isn't that kind of like what the premise of the organization Brand New Congress was supposed to be about? Is it? And we could go along with that as well to elect more progressives to Congress and get them elected to also get rid of all these corporatists as well, to dump the corruption at a faster rate.
Right, at a rate that will be effective. The Brand New Congress effort and the Justice Democrat effort is too slow moving. It can't be effective. It's facing the power structure in Congress that begins to corrupt the new representatives as soon as they get in. That's why the litmus test promises change in a single election of the Congress. Radical change. Okay? If everybody does it, only a handful of the old people are going to get through. I mean, we're going to have, I don't know, 410 new Congress people getting through in all the parties. It's going to affect all the parties. All the Republicans are going to go because every one of them is taking the big money. Most of the Democrats are going to go because most of them are taking the big money. It's going to give third parties a chance to get people into Congress. It's going to get a big chance for ranked choice voting to be immediately enacted in a new Congress full of new representatives. Right now, the Congress has a hierarchical structure because it's based on seniority and because of rules that favor control of the House by the Speaker. Here's something that can easily disrupt it. You pass a new rule that says if 20 Congress people support a bill, co-sponsor a bill, that bill gets a floor vote in a certain amount of time. Now, I'm not saying 20 is the right number. Maybe it's 30. Maybe it's going to be 15. I picked up the number 20 out of the air.
That is a reasonable number.
Well, if there are 435 congressmen, it might not be such a reasonable number. Okay, in other words, what I think you have to have is something that increases the power of the individual congressman that you just elected, but that doesn't give so much power to the individual congressman that as they work together, there is chaos. In other words, you have to have a Congress that actually works and can pass bills. So that number of 20 might produce too many floor votes per year. There's such a thing as too many floor votes, making floor votes not too meaningful. But there's some number, I don't know if it's 20 or 30 or 40, some number that means that good legislation that captures a lot of support deserves a floor vote and cannot be bottlenecked in committee and cannot be bottlenecked by a Nancy Pelosi figure or a Richie Neal figure or somebody like that. That whether they like it or not, it's going to get a floor vote. That's one rule that can change things. Okay. Another rule that can change things is no pay go. Just get rid of pay go.
Let's abolish it. Let's just throw it in the trash can where it belongs.
Throw it in the trash can where it belongs because it makes no sense from a federal financing point of view, from the reality of federal financing. Pay go makes absolutely no sense. It's destructive of the public purpose. It's destructive of doing really good things, okay, in Congress. But this gets me, I do want to raise the issue in the 5 minutes or so that remain. Our second objective is to break off a big bloc of people now in the Congressional Progressive Caucus, get them to declare themselves, okay, as independents, the way Bernie Sanders did so many years, and the way Kirsten Sinema, she of the evil soul, declared herself as an independent. She registered as an independent. And of course, she's getting all kinds of interviews. She loves to attract attention. And she's giving a whole line of bullshit on why she became, an independent and is no longer going to run as a Democrat. And of course, we're supposed to believe that she didn't do it in part because she was sure to get whipped in 2024 if she ran in the Democratic primary. We know she's trying to avoid that. And she may not even, at all participate in things, though she says she's going back to her old committees. She's going to use seniority rules to her advantage in the Senate. Nothing will really change except that she won't have to stand in a primary as an independent. She'll go right to the general election. We need a bloc, of progressives to do that as well, so that they can't be challenged, in Democratic primaries by big money. And also so that they cannot be so easily controlled by the establishment hierarchy in the Democratic Party in the House. We need some independent senators, too, who are being pushed around by the establishment in the Senate.
Yes, we do. We desperately need that. So that way they are no longer, they can actually, like, take Bernie, for example. He's been able to use that as political leverage for as long as he's been elected in Vermont. So
yeah,
we need more people like
Jeff
that.
Merkley to become an independent.
Ooh.
We need Ed Markey to become, an independent.
I like those two.
Need Kirsten Gillibrand to become an independent. She's becoming a decent old lady the longer she stays in the Senate. She's no longer Hillary Clinton's creature. She's much closer to being Bernie Sanders' girlfriend. No implication. Sorry, no implication.
I'm sorry. I had to laugh at that one.
But she often collaborates a lot with Bernie and looks to him for leadership these days.
Doesn't she also support Medicare for all?
She supports Medicare for all. She supports the Green New Deal now, too.
Well, that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Yeah, I'm not coming down on her. I'm saying as she gets older, she gets better.
People like her that do adopt policy platform positions like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, total student loan debt for elimination, they do deserve praise because they are actually supporting something that's popular with the American public. So they do deserve to get credit regardless of which party they're in. With her supporting Medicare for all, that's a good thing. Her supporting the Green New Deal, that's a great thing. And we need to keep pushing her. I think she would be somebody good to push even further to the left now if she's taking on these policy perspectives. And maybe we can get through to somebody like a Kirsten Gillibrand, Ed Markey, and who's that other gentleman you just mentioned from out west?
Well, I mentioned Jeff Merkley, and Ed Markey.
See, if we can push people like,
and of course, I cannot allow to go unmentioned John Fetterman.
Oh yeah, he supported a lot of these popular policy talking points right out of the gate.
Well, not only that, though, Lisa knows John Fetterman pretty well. And we think that John Fetterman, as he gets his sea legs in the Senate, will be very close to Bernie and will maybe become the heir apparent if he can stay healthy. So he should certainly go to an independent position also. There are 5 to 10 senators who would benefit from doing that and creating a coalition of independent senators who would hold a balance of power in the Senate. We need that too. Okay, so the issue is, how do we separate these people in the House, the real progressives in the House and the real progressives in the Senate, from the Democrats and get them to go independent, to declare their independence, to make a declaration, okay, of independence? Of course, now they're going to think, oh, well, now that Kirsten Sinema has done that, we don't want to have anything to do with that. They shouldn't react that way. They shouldn't react that way. Kirsten Sinema is doing this because she sees the value of being an independent that everybody courts. Joe Manchin does what he does because he sees the value of being independent. If you want to reduce their power, the way to reduce their power is for a whole block of people on the left to become independent themselves.
And then they can wage their political leverage over everybody else,
including President Joe Biden.
Yeah, it would be a useful tool because then they can use that political leverage to get things done at a much rapid rate than what it currently is, where we're just getting crumbs.
Okay, so we're at 1 hour and 2 minutes now. And if I'm going to keep up this pace of 5 live shows a week, I'm going to have to stick with my schedules. But, of course, we always want to take account, okay, of your comments. So, Greg, at this point, okay, if you need to leave, okay, or want to leave, you may.
Yeah.
Okay, but if you want to stay for the comments, then I'll be happy to have you stay until we finish them.
Don't really matter to me. But yeah, it's going to have to take getting a whole block of them, of the true progressives, breaking away so that way they can wage political leverage. We need a whole group of people elected to the House, to the Senate on the federal level, along with the House and Senate on the state levels as independents, just so that way we can have that political leverage to get things done and passed much more quicker.
Absolutely. We absolutely need that.
The Dump the Corruption campaign should cover not only the federal level, but also the state level. We need to take on our state governments as well.
All right. And our local governments also. The Dump the Corruption campaign, it's a general rule. It should be applied at all levels, okay, of politics. Okay. What you have to remember is if people are taking the big money when they just start out, okay, at the lowest level, they're going to take it for all their political lives. So you got to get them early, and you got to make the point, you're not getting elected to office if you're taking the big money. You're not even going to get elected dog catcher.
One thing I would love to see the Dump the Corruption campaign do, I'd like to see it also. Let's say we become, let's say our movement of what we're doing is a success here in the U.S. who's to say that the corruption isn't also mirrored in a country like Canada, where they have a lot of rampant corruption, over in the UK and other corrupt countries. That would be amazing to see what we here started trickle out into other countries. That would be beautiful.
Yeah, well, it may have started already in some of the Latin American countries, some of the South American countries, because there's such a radical split there between the haves and the have-nots that the have-nots, the indigenous peoples, their parties don't get big money. They have to rely on the ground games and the support of the indigenous people to get anywhere. And then when they get in office, they're sure to face a coup quickly in the first few months. That's going on in Peru right now, where Pedro Castillo has been facing that.
He just got recently impeached, I think,
He
and
did,
removed from
did
office.
get recently impeached and, yes, and removed from office. And the question now is whether the indigenous will accept the bullshit campaigns against him that are being run by the rich, or whether they'll get out into the streets and not go back home until he's reinstalled.
I think they should stay out in the streets and get some action.
And that's what I think too. But, they know it. But they'll pay a heavy price for getting out in the streets and staying out in the streets. And they're the ones who have to decide whether they want to do that, or not. But that's what the power struggle is in those countries. If the indigenous people are to be represented, they have to make sure their representatives are protected against false charges and the usual attempts to coup them. So I want to say to Steve Wolfbrandt, thank you, Steve, for calling to people to smash the like button. That's very important, of course. Like, share, and subscribe. And Steve Day says, party caucusing and independency in Congress, yes. Dump the incumbents. Hashtag dump the corruption, Steve Day. Hashtag dump the corruption. Hashtag, yeah. Super PACs do a lot of attack ads. They do. They focus on attack ads. And the response to those attack ads should be, look at what the rich are doing to ensure that I, who won't take any of their money, won't become your representative. They want to see to it that my opponent becomes your representative. That's why they're supporting he or she. Steve says, hi, Kay. Steve Day says, super PAC laundry. Yeah, they're laundry. They launder money. Robert Copeland says, here in California, any campaign mailers or TV ads have to show the top three funders. Yes, but that doesn't help if the real funders are behind the top three funders. And so Dolores is here. She says, hello, everyone. Dolores here for Around the World with Brandy and Dee, who, by the way, are going to have a show tomorrow night, which should be a pretty cool show. Okay, I believe we're both going to be guests on that show, right, Greg?
Yes, sir, we will be.
And Steve Day says, does opposition on CU have a following? You mean the opposition to CU have a following? Yeah, I think it has a big following. But the problem is, with the filibuster in the Senate and with the Republicans controlling the House, You're not going to pass an anti-CU amendment through Congress at this point. You got to dump the corruption first. By the way, dump the corruption is going to replace 1/3 of the Senate in 2024. 1/3 new senators. Most probably all of them opposing the filibuster. That's going to change the balance of power and may make possible, after a single election, the defeat of the filibuster, the total breaking of the filibuster, not just carve outs, getting rid of the filibuster. Kay Ryan says Nina should have won. I know. Steve Day says AIPAC beat Nina in dollars, far above spending by all the others in the campaign. I know. Dropping millions of dollars at the last minute in order to run TV campaigns to beat Nina by making false charges. We all know what happened. But it was also, don't forget, it was also the DMFI. That is the Democratic majority for Israel. That super PAC that was instrumental in beating Nina in this latest run.
Yeah, it was a very dirty tactic.
Yes. Well, the influence of money, toxic money in politics. That's what we got to get rid of. And Sandy Degg says, hello, Dolores, Kay, Steve, Robert, Greg, Bonnie, and Joe. Shared. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
And Kay says Clyburn is a bad sign. Yeah. Yeah, he has the devil's horns wherever he goes. CC Swift says, hi, 9:30 break tonight. Does Greg know about open secrets in Ballotpedia? Yes.
Yeah, I answered that one when he pressed that question.
Exactly, Greg. You can use those sites to point out the huge money to the interviewees on your program in the near future. Yeah, I think I'm going to do more of that also. I've been thinking actually of looking at the people who claim to be progressives, the members of the CPC, and going over the campaign money that these 100 have gotten from various contributors. In particular, I want to see if there are more than 10 of them who are not taking big money donations.
Like Pramila Jayapal, for example.
Yeah, Pramila Jayapal doesn't pass the litmus test. She's a House member who would be gone. She takes a lot of medical industrial complex money.
Oh my God. Not only that, I'm on Open Secrets right now and talking about Pramila Jayapal. She takes money from George Soros.
Yes.
But right now, she's got 2.6, a little over 2.6 million cash on hand for re-election next cycle.
Yes, in the next cycle. And by the time the next cycle rolls around in 2024, she's going to have a war chest of 5 or 6 million.
But I'm out of here for tonight. Let's all get to work on looking at the whole CPC and then forming an opinion and creating a whole show dedicated to dumping the corruption even in the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
Right. I look forward to such a show. And not only that, that will give us information as to who are the most likely people that we can get out of a Democratic caucus into an independent bloc caucus that
Mm-hmm.
we want to create. The second objective. We have these two objectives we've talked about here tonight.
Yeah.
Jay
Our next,
asks, what is Greg's new podcast called?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I'll have to brainstorm opinions on what I'm going to call my show, but I'll let y'all know and fill y'all in. I'll leave you in suspense.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Cece says, hi, Sandy.
But I'm out for tonight, y'all. Y'all have a great night.
Okay, good night, Greg. Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed tonight. And CC Swift says, hi, Sandy. Robert Copeland said there's another way to overturn CU, but it'd be very hard to do, and that is by constitutional amendment. Yes, right. As I said later, Robert, it takes a long time. It's very hard to do. She says, Joe, in an older show, yeah, I think I answered that already as to what to do to rein in the corrupt SCOTUS. It's really hard to do that without getting rid of the money first. Shane says that would be hard. They don't want to give up all that money. And Lana says, dump the corruption is a lot about voting strategically, along with not instead of general strikes and protesting, etc. People on the left who really want change need to get over not voting, quote unquote. And of course, I completely agree, Lana. But what they should be voting to do is to disrupt the current system by dumping the corruption. Lana says, hi, Kay and Sandy. Robert says, the squad has been failing the people now. Absolutely. Cece says, thanks, Joe. Still learning. Cece says, and won't Republicans in turn pack the court too by expanding the court? Cece, my answer to that, okay, is this. If we get people in there who are representing the people and who are not beholden to any donors, then the people who would want to in turn pack the court by expanding it will not even get into office. That is the important thing. Okay, there are many people who say, well, what happens when the Republicans get their turn? And my answer to that is, if the uncorrupted people in office that we elect through dump the corruption, then these Republicans will never get back into office. Not for 20 years. Maybe not for 30 years. Maybe not for 40 years. As the people in the Roosevelt administration used to say, I don't think it was Harry Hopkins, but somebody else very famous from the Roosevelt administration. I got to look it up after the show. Tax and tax. Spend and spend. Elect and elect. That's what he said. And that worked from 1933 through 1952. And even in 1952, it resulted in the election of a president who would not have wanted to pack a liberal court, since he himself, Eisenhower himself, had appointed some members who were liberal. In particular, Chief Justice Earl Warren. But if we also keep in mind that after a brief tenure controlling the House in 1953 to 1954, the Republicans were thrown out in 1954, and from 1955 to the time of Newt Gingrich in 1995, they never controlled the House again. Cece add good talking point about small donors. Cece says, Greg, will your show be called Haymakers Against Corruption? Hey, Greg, that is a really good comment. Robert Copeland, my congressperson will be 80 years old in 2024. Well, if your congressperson is a good congressperson, then they may still be effective at 80 years old. Next month, I'll be 84 years old. Lana says, Joe, you are insulting the rest of the evil souls. Smile. Cinema. Her problem is probably her name. She never really got over her name. So she decided to take on that identity. Cece says, progressives in the House should follow Cinema's move back to work. Good night. Thank you, Cece. Good comments as usual. Sandy says, laugh out loud. Kay says, night, CC. Robert says, one of my U.S. senators will be 91 if she chooses to run in 2024. I didn't know Feinstein was that old. I guess I did. Lana says, don't forget Sheldon Whitehouse. Yes, Sheldon Whitehouse would probably be a wonderful senator if we could sit him down for about a month and give him a crash course on MMT, so he doesn't put forward balanced budget amendments again. God, that was such a travesty. Lana says, Feinstein can't even put a full paragraph together at this point. No offense, but retire already. Robert says, Lana, I agree, as she is too old. Sandy says, good grief. She's older than my mother. She needs to go. Sandy says, maybe she needs the money. Not. She's one of the richest people in the Senate. She might even be the richest person in the Senate. Robert Copeland says, what time is the show tomorrow? I believe Around the World with Brandy and Dee will be going on at 8 p.m. tomorrow. That's the show we're talking about. I don't have a show tomorrow. I don't have a show on Sunday. I take the days off. So Dolores says, good night, Greg. And Sandy says, did Harry Hopkins say that? I wasn't sure. That was my first guess. And Kay says, night, Greg. So I'm going to say good night to everybody. Thank you tonight. It was a great deal of fun. I think Greg and I work very, very well together. I'm glad he asked me to put him on the show. So bye, folks. Good night. Have a wonderful weekend.